Chapter 18 goes along really well with chapter 17, which was reproductive system. In chapter 18, we talk about development in human life, the prenatal period, birth defects, a little bit more about milk production, and the postnatal period. So it's kind of a continuation on from the reproductive chapter. The prenatal period is the period of development before birth, and postnatal period is after birth. And again, fertilization is the union of an egg and a sperm. Prenatal development, we divide it into these three phases, and you can see the phases listed here. Pre-embryonic, embryonic is week 3 to 8, and then fetal period is week 9 until birth. You can see the major events that happen in each of these periods. You can see here a zygote, which is the fertilized sperm and egg, a blastocyst implanting into the wall of the uterus, an embryo at about 7 weeks old, and then a fetus about 5 months old. The pre-embryonic period begins with fertilization and the union of the egg and the sperm. Typically, an egg only lives 12 to 24 hours after its release. Most eggs get fertilized with the sperm within 12 hours of the egg's release. So in pre-embryonic period, we have fertilization, cleavage, which is the first kind of splitting of that zygote, formation and implantation of the blastocyst into the wall of the uterus, and the beginning of the formation of membranes of the blastocyst and the placenta. So here's just another look at the fertilization would occur here for the egg and sperm, and then the cleavage is the 2-cell state. When it cleaves into 2 cells, then 4 cells, 8 morula, then it's called a blastocyst. And eventually by about day 6, we get an implantation with an endometrium and an inner mass layer. Fertilization occurs in the oviduct, and that's when enzymes from the sperm's acrosome create a pathway through the layers to get into the cytoplasm of the secondary oocyte. The zona pellucida of the egg itself hardens, preventing entry of any other additional sperm. A zygote then is a fertilized ovum containing genetic material from the mother and the father, 23 chromosomes each, so we get 46 total. So here's a look at what happens when the sperm reaches the egg, and again, the head will fuse with the plasma membrane and release the genetic material. Cleavage is the rapid series of mitotic divisions, beginning as the zygote moves down the oviduct. By day 4, the pre-embryo is a solid ball of 12 or more cells called a morula. If the ball of cells splits, then 2 pre-embryos are formed. So the splitting of an egg into 2 pre-embryos will produce identical twins, which are monozygotic, or conjoined twins form if the splitting is incomplete. If 2 secondary oocytes are released from the ovaries and fertilized by different sperm, then 2 embryos may develop, and this produces fraternal twins. So identical twins are produced when 2 pre-embryos are formed from 1 ball of cells, and fraternal twins, non-identical, are produced when 2 eggs are released at the same time and they're fertilized by 2 different sperm. Here are identical twins result when a single fertilized egg splits. Rarely the splitting is incomplete, but that would be conjoined twins, and fraternal twins result from the fertilization of 2 eggs by different sperm. Blastocyst is formed by day 6. There's 2 parts of it, the inner cell mass and the tropoblast. The inner cell mass becomes the embryo proper, and the tropoblast gives rise to the extra embryonic membrane. That's the embryo's contribution to the placenta, and that's the organ that delivers oxygen and nutrients to the embryo. Implantation occurs about 6 days after fertilization. The blastocyst becomes embedded into that endometrium layer of the uterus. And an ectopic pregnancy, like we mentioned in the last chapter, results if that blastocyst implants outside the uterus, usually in an oviduct. So this is showing implantation. HCG is human chorionic gonadotropin, and this is a hormone produced by the blastocyst during implantation. It's later produced by the placenta, and it's screened for in many pregnancy tests because this means there was a positive pregnancy. It maintains the corpus luteum and stimulates it to continue producing progesterone, which is essential for the maintenance of the endometrium layer in the uterus. Infertility is the ability to become pregnant, whether that's from a male's perspective or female's perspective, and a couple is considered infertile if conception does not occur after 1 year of trying. And implantation can be a major hurdle to this. So a lot of times you can get a fertilized egg of the blastocyst, but implantation is sometimes a major hurdle. Here are the embryonic membranes. There's 4 membranes that begin to form around the pre-embryo. And you can see these 4 membranes forming around the embryo here with the umbilical cord, with all the blood vessels going into the embryo itself. The amnion encloses the embryo in a cavity filled with amniotic fluid to help serve as protective cushion. The yolk sac is the site of early blood cell formation. The allantois is the small membrane whose blood vessels become part of the umbilical cord. And the chorion is the outermost membrane, which becomes the embryo's contribution to the placenta, which, speaking of the placenta, functions to allow oxygen and nutrients to diffuse from the maternal blood into the embryonic blood. It allows wastes to diffuse from blood into maternal blood, and it will produce hormones essential for continued pregnancy like HCG, estrogen, and progesterone. The placenta forms from the chorion of the embryo and the endometrium of the mother. Chorionic villi are finger-like processes of the chorion, and these will provide the exchange surfaces for nutrients, oxygen, and wastes. Placenta previa is a condition in which the placenta forms in the lower part of the uterus and covers the cervix. This can be dangerous, and usually delivery by C-section is necessary. So this is a look at the placenta beginning to form and the internal structure of the placenta, with these chorionic villi structures, which allow for the nutrient gas exchange occur between mother and baby. Embryonic period, gastrulation, and the formation of tissues, organs, and organ structures. So the 3 processes produce the embryo, which has a distinct human appearance by the end of this period: cell division, cell differentiation, and morphogenesis, which is just the development of the overall body organization and shape. Gastrulation are when cells within the embryonic disc differentiate and migrate to form these 3 primary germ layers, which all tissues and organs come from. The ectoderm is the outermost layer, the mesoderm, middle, and endoderm, innermost. This is a key part of morphogenesis. So here's the morula around day 4, early blastocyst, late blastocyst, and then here we get the gastrula, which is the embryo with these 3 germ layers. And you can see the ectoderm in yellow, the mesoderm in the middle, and then the endoderm. It also lists here what develops from each layer. So your ectoderm will develop into your nervous system outer skin layer, mesoderm will develop into muscles and bones, and the endoderm will develop into the lining of the digestive, urinary, and respiratory tracts. So we kind of went through this. You can read what each layer develops into. The development of the central nervous system is a process called neurulation, where the embryo is called a neurula. The brain develops from the anterior end, and the spinal cord develops from the posterior end. And the nodal cord induces the overlying ectoderm to thicken and eventually form a fluid-filled tube called the neural tube. Failure for this neural tube to develop properly and close can lead to spina bifida, which can sometimes be corrected with surgeries in utero within the uterus, or anencephaly is the incomplete development of the brain, and this can result in stillbirth or death shortly after birth. So here's a look at spina bifida. Basically, when the vertebral canal doesn't completely close over the spinal cord. Sometimes can be corrected in utero. That will be a surgery. Somites block the mesoderm alongside the neural tube. They form the skeletal muscle of the neck, trunk, connective tissues, and vertebrae. The development of the reproductive system, the sex chromosomes X and Y determine the gender of the embryo, and You can get a blood test for this to determine the gender of your baby really early on in pregnancy. So XX is female and XY is male. Development of the testes in the male embryos begins about 6 weeks after fertilization, and testosterone produced by the testes directs the development of the male reproductive organs. So already by 6 weeks after fertilization, males will go through a series of biological changes to get their testosterone to help to produce their reproductive organs. Female embryos lack the Y chromosome, so your ovaries develop, and internal and external reproductive structures are formed by the end of the 3rd month. So this is a look at male development versus female development, showing how the penis would develop versus the lack of a penis in the females right around 10 weeks of gestation. Great video on the prenatal period. Fetal period, the fetus will increase in length, weight. Allometric growth is the difference in the relative rates of growth of various parts of the body. So you can see here the prenatal period. At 2 months, the head is kind of too big for the body at this point, and by 4 months in newborn, everything kind of averages out. And then the postnatal period. Fetal circulation, there's several organs that do not perform their postnatal functions in the fetus, and most blood is shunted past these organs, the lungs, kidneys, and liver, through temporary vessels or openings, just because they're not fully developed yet. The shunts, the ductus venosus, allows most blood to bypass the liver and enter the inferior vena cava. The foramen ovale is a small hole in the wall between the right atrium and left atrium, and this allows most blood to bypass the lungs. And the ductus arteriosus connects the pulmonary trunk to the aorta to divert most blood away from the lungs. The lungs aren't ready to receive any blood because they're not fully developed yet. At birth, all organs take on their postnatal function. So your ductus venosus and ductus arteriosus constrict, shrivel, and form ligaments. And foramen ovale closes. If it fails to close, we get what we call blue babies, meaning they're not getting the blood supplied to their lungs yet. So that can be a problem. So this is a look at how the ductus arteriosus becomes a ligament. The foramen ovale closes and leaves a depression. The ductus venosus becomes a ligament. The umbilical vein becomes a ligament, and umbilical arteries become ligaments. Birth is also called parturition. It usually occurs about 38 weeks after fertilization. Oxytocin from your posterior pituitary gland prompts uterine contraction, and this is a positive feedback cycle, meaning they'll keep producing more oxytocin and more contraction until the birth of the baby. Labor, 3 stages of labor, the process by which the fetus is expelled from the uterus: dilation, expulsion, and then the placental expulsion. Dilation is when the contractions will start and continue until the cervix is fully dilated or open to about 10 centimeters. Expulsion will begin with full dilation and end with delivery of the baby. And the placental stage begins with the delivery of the baby and ends when the placenta is expelled from the mother's body. So this just kind of shows the 3 stages here. Position of the baby during birth. Most babies are born head first, facing the vertebral column. Some are born buttocks first, and we call this a breech birth. This can sometimes be associated with a difficult labor and delivery. Full-term infant is a baby born at 38 weeks. Premature infant is any baby born before 37 weeks. Development effects at birth may concern structure, function, behavior, or metabolisms. They can be caused by genetic factors or environmental factors due to drugs and radiation. Most major defects during the critical periods of rapid cell differentiation most major defects will occur during the pre-embryonic period. So these are the pre-embryonic period, cleavage and implantation within 1 and 2 weeks in the embryonic period, and it's showing how harmful agents can cause minor birth defects kind of later in pregnancy, and how harmful agents can cause major birth defects earlier in pregnancy, shown more on the left side. Lactation is the production and injection of milk. It's caused by prolactin, which promotes milk production, and oxytocin, which stimulates milk ejection. The schedule of milk production, colostrum, is produced immediately after birth to help nourish the baby, and then milk will be produced about day 3. Both contain antibodies and special proteins to boost the immune system of the baby and could offer protection for the woman against breast cancer. Postnatal period, the stages are infancy, childhood, adolescence, and adulthood, and I'll let you read when those stages occur. Aging is the normal and progressive decline in the structure and function of the bodies of adults. Changes to the organ systems occur gradually. This is a look at the organ systems and some changes that occur with aging. If you want to read through that, very interesting. The postnatal period causes of aging, changes in critical organ systems, cells stop dividing, damage to DNA, caloric restriction does not slow aging in some animals, and then genes, environment, and your lifestyle will determine your human lifespan. High quality old age. Aging is a normal biologic process, but at present it can't be slowed, stopped, or reversed. Today, I think the maximum documented lifespan for someone is 122, and life expectancy for babies born in the US today is about 79 years, which is incredibly high. Lifestyle factor is the key factor over which we have the most personal control. A healthy lifestyle, refraining from smoking, alcohol, plenty of exercise, getting routine medical checkups. The lifestyle choices you guys make when you're young can delay some of these aspects of aging. So from this PowerPoint, you should be able to differentiate some of these key terms with prenatal development, this order, stages of labor, and then some of the postnatal growth and developmental changes. Thanks for listening, guys.